We've all heard of dream visits from our loved ones on the other side who have physically passed away. But what about dream visits from people or souls who are still in physical living bodies? That's what we're going to talk about today. What exactly are dreams? First, we need to acknowledge the fact that our souls do not need sleep. Only our physical bodies do. So what does this mean? This means that when we are physically sleeping, our brains are what are needing the sleep, our physical bodies are what are needing the sleep. When we are physically sleeping, our brains are reaching the brainwave states that advanced meditators or people who are seeking to actively meditate are trying to reach. This means that our soul and our higher self are more able to reach our conscious mind and provide information to us upon waking. Hence why we may remember our dreams upon waking up. When we are physically sleeping, however, our souls, like I said, are not physically sleeping because they don't need to physically sleep. Thus, when we are physically sleeping, what are our souls doing? What they do all the time, communing with other souls. When we are sleeping, our souls can work with any souls. Our souls can work with the souls of those who are still in physical bodies or not in physical bodies because they are all one and the same. Our souls also receive information from our own higher selves, and our higher selves can provide information from the higher selves of others or from the souls of other people. And why is this the case? This is the case because essentially our souls can always do this. It's our human brains that block us from receiving the information when we're waking, right? So when I'm providing an intuitive reading or a psychic reading, I'm connecting with you. I'm connecting with your higher self and or your soul. I'm able to receive that information because I'm able to set my physical brain to the side. I'm able to quiet my mind chatter and receive the information through that, right? So we also are able to connect to our intuition throughout our daily lives. If we are able to train ourselves to differentiate our mind chatter from our intuition and or quiet our mind chatter enough to allow our intuition to come through. In other words, we are always connecting to our own soul, our own higher self, and to the souls and higher selves of other people. It is simply our human brain that gets quote unquote in the way. When we are sleeping, our human brain is dropping to a lower, slower brainwave state and is no longer in the way. So what does this mean? What do dreams from our own higher selves mean? Or why do we have them? Or why would we want? What does it mean when we work with the souls of other living people in our dreams? Well, these dreams can be predictive in nature for your own use or predictive for the other lives of the people who you are dreaming with or about. What I mean by this is you may have a dream that predicts something about your own life, or you may have a dream that predicts something about the lives or life of the people who you are dreaming with or about, if you want to word it that way. So you may have a dream via communing with the soul or blending with the soul of your living father, and you may predict via that dream something about your living father's life, and or it may not be predictive at all. You may just know something about him that he has not verbally shared with you via that dream. That can also happen. And these dreams are not meant to be shared with these people. If you know something about a person that they have chosen not to share with you verbally, that doesn't mean you need to run and tell them that you've had this dream. If you predict something about another person that you've had a dream with or about, that does not mean that you are meant to run and share that with that person. And predictions can be of what we humans would consider to be negative events. For example, sometimes we will unfortunately have predictive dreams of death. Or predictive dreams can be what we humans consider to be of positive events or positive things. So we may predict the birth of a new baby when somebody isn't even pregnant yet. This said, from the standpoint of spirit, from the standpoint of your soul and or your higher self or the souls and higher selves of other people, There is no such thing as negative or positive. That is important to remember when you're asking yourself, why am I receiving predictions of negative things? There is only neutral events. In the case of spirit, there is only neutrality. There is no negative or positive. Negative and positive is of the human ego. So that is important to remember. It is also important to remember that if you dream of something negative, for example, a death, that does not mean that the death is going to be literal. It could be that your relationship with that person is dying. It could be that the old version of that person is dying. It could be that that person is going through an identity crisis. It could be that that person is going to experience a death of a relationship in their life. There's other potentialities, so it's important not to always jump to conclusions. So why do we receive predictive dreams or predictive information when we dream about other living people with their souls, with their higher selves? Well, there are a couple main reasons here. One is to remind us that we are all connected. It is to remind us that we are indeed a soul in a human body with a higher self, and that we are absolutely all connected. We are absolutely all part of one. So we are all communing, like I said, with one another at all times, and that when our brain is out of the way, that is the case, and it is to bring us an awakening or an awareness to that fact. Additionally, sometimes the information isn't necessarily meant to make its way to our consciousness. It perhaps does so on accident. So when your physical body is sleeping and your soul is working with other souls, your higher self is working with other souls or other higher selves, and your sleep cycle maybe hits just right, the information kind of sneaks through, or it makes its way into your conscious memory. Maybe it wasn't necessarily intended to do so, it just so happened that your sleep cycle hit just right, and you just so happened to remember that information when it wasn't the intention. Other times, the predictive information is intended and it's meant for you to reflect back on after the fact, perhaps after the event has later occurred. It is meant to remind you of your connection with that person or persons, or remind you of your connection with your own higher self. It's meant for you to learn from or reflect upon in some way. The example I will give later in this video is definitely a case of this. Very rarely you are meant to act on a predictive dream. I don't think that this is the case hardly ever. You're not meant to run and do something about it. You're not meant to run and try to prevent something from happening. I do not think that predictive dreams are meant to be taken literally or within context in terms of being actionable the majority of the time. So how do you interpret dreams that you have had with other living souls, or with the higher selves of other people, or with your own higher self? How do you know what they mean? First of all, these dreams are not always going to be literal. Oftentimes they will include metaphors and symbolism. So for example, once had a dream that my sister was going to move across the country before she actually moved across the country. When I had that dream, she was walking through a house with a realtor, and she was looking at this home. And in the dream, she took a handful of brightly colored markers and she threw them up in the air, and the markers froze there in the air, and she looked at them in the dream as though she was studying them. And at the time, I had no idea that she was even considering leaving the city that she was living in. And at the time, I knew that she was not in a position whatsoever to buy a house, so I really didn't necessarily know what the dream meant. About 6 months later or so, she did end up quitting her job and moving completely across the country. So in hindsight, what the dream represented was that she was entertaining moving, hence walking through a house and scoping it out, and she was in the process of drawing a completely new life. And the markers were a metaphor for that, a brand new, colorful life that nobody knew about. So I was not intended to interpret that dream as literal. First of all, there was symbolism, there was metaphors in that dream. There's a bunch of onion peel layers there to be dissected. But I also wasn't meant to interpret it when I had it. I was meant to interpret it later after she moved. At the time that I had the dream, she already knew that moving was more than likely going to be in the works and in process, but nobody else knew, including me. that was my soul working with her soul, or my higher self working with her higher self. When it comes to metaphors and symbolism and figuring out what they mean, oftentimes you can feel into them and interpret them with your clairsentience, your clear feeling, that's a psychic sense of feeling, or you can use your analytical mind to do it. And this is really cool to do this. You can use other clues in your life. So oftentimes metaphors and symbolism will be drawn from your daily life or things that have come up in your life in terms of pieces and details that have meaning to you, or just random tiny little things that you have seen come across your consciousness or your objective reality that have really small nuanced meaning that will then show up in your dream. So for example, this comes up in mediumship readings. One time my family and I went to the pumpkin farm and we saw some ducks standing and sleeping on one leg. And we made a comment in passing. We're like, oh, we didn't know ducks slept standing on one leg. And a couple of days later, that a duck in one leg appeared in my reading to symbolize somebody being very tired. So that could appear in a dream to symbolize somebody being very tired. So that's an example of something crossing my objective path for just a split moment, and then in that instance coming into a reading, but it could have come into a dream. Those are ways that metaphors and symbolism will show up, in addition to using your clear feeling to determine what they mean or feel into them. But always keep in mind that metaphors and symbolism are not always going to make sense until they're meant to make sense. So go back to that example with my sister. I probably would not have figured out what those markers meant prior to finding out from her that she was actually moving. I was not going to figure that out. I didn't really try, to be quite honest, but I wasn't meant to know what they symbolized until her moving made it into my objective reality. So sometimes you will try and try and try, and you just will not figure out the metaphors and symbolism until later on. This is why it is very important to write down your dreams immediately after they happen. I recommend this 1000%. Keep a dream journal next to your bed and write down your dreams. And the reason for this is that we often forget the tiny little nuanced details of our dreams almost immediately. Within 1 to 3 minutes after waking up, a large portion of the dream is gone. Write it down, because those small nuanced parts are where the meat and potatoes, the deep meaning of your dreams will be. And oftentimes you will make sense of those nuanced parts later on that same day or even months later. Additionally, the more you write your dreams down, the more you will find yourself remembering your dreams. It's like it primes your conscious mind to pull more from your soul, to pull more from your higher self. That really definitely does work. And lastly, as a very last resort to interpret dreams, and I feel like this is often the first place people go, or the first thing people do, you can Google the symbolism and metaphors in your dream. So Google the spiritual meaning of koalas if you had a koala in your dream, or the spiritual meaning of cheese if there was cheese in your dream, or whatever the case may be. Oftentimes this is the first thing people do, or they maybe even have a dream dictionary, but I don't think that this is where dream meanings usually come from, because I do feel like metaphors and symbolisms in dreams are often very personal and singular, and you are often going to be led down the wrong road when you do this. However, if it is a last resort and you absolutely cannot figure out the metaphors and symbolisms in your dream, and some time has gone by, go ahead and do this. I myself do this from time to time, but like I said, it is a last resort. And finally, this last example, when I had a dream of my dog's passing 2 weeks before it actually occurred, this is how it went. To start off, this was not a part of the dream, but in my objective reality, my real life, my uncle, who passed away a year and a half ago, about a month before he passed, he had called me and he had asked me if I would repaint a statue of his that was in the shape of an eagle, because it was very faded from the sun. It looked very much like this, but it was very faded because it had been sitting out in the sun. I laughed and I'm like, Uncle Jerry, I cannot paint like that. I don't know why you think I could, but my husband can. My husband's an artist. He can paint that way. So my husband repainted the statue, and it was really beautiful and well done, and he gave it back to Jerry. And Jerry died about 2.5 weeks later, after the statue had been repainted and given back to him. Additionally, we have a family friend who, about a decade ago or so, he passed in his sleep from a heart issue. I believe it was a pulmonary embolism. And this friend had been an amazing wood carver. He carved all sorts of very beautiful pieces out of wood. So theoretically, if my Uncle Jerry's eagle had not been ceramic, this other family friend could have carved an eagle out of wood. So about 9 months or so after after Jerry passed, I had a dream. And in the dream, my husband's friend, who we will call, I'm not going to use his real name, we will call Craig. In the dream, Craig came up to me and he presented me with a wooden carved statue of an eagle. And the wooden carved statue of the eagle was painted in very pastel colors. And he said, "Here, Mary, I gave you this gift." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And then my husband walked up in the dream and he said, "Craig, why did you use such muted colors?" And Craig said, "I don't know. I just wanted to use a muted palette this time." And I woke up. And when I woke up from that dream, I had an immediate knowing that it was a predictive, intuitive dream. This will often be the case when you have these types of dreams with the souls of other people, with the higher selves of other people. You'll often know that it was that type of dream upon waking. And I thought, I interpreted the dream being that Craig was going to pass. So much so that I even said something to my husband about it, and he's like, "Well, should I say something to him?" And I'm like, "No, we can't. That's not ethical. That's not proper." I thought that Craig was going to pass from something with his heart because of the person who had done wood carvings having passed that way. And I was very worried and I was very concerned. So cut to 2 weeks after this dream, and my dog passes away. And my dog had been nearly 19 years old. And for those of you who know or have been following me on Instagram and Facebook, you know that there is a crazy reincarnation story with him. And that the reincarnation story involves my new dog, Marnie, the new version of him. And that Marnie is almost primarily all white in comparison to Twix, who was much darker. So the day or days after Twix passed, it all of a sudden clicked what this dream had meant. You see, my husband's friend Craig had, after my husband's mom died, had adopted my husband's mom's dog, who just so happened to be the same breed as my dog who died. And he kept this dog until the dog died. And dogs are put to sleep. They are given medicine that makes their heart literally stop in their sleep, just like the person who carved the wood had been. So Craig had, in my consciousness, represented my dog. And my consciousness had not wanted to let me know that my dog was literally going to pass, so they flipped it to Craig to represent him, because I wouldn't have been able to cognitively handle it had I literally seen my dog in my dream handing me that statue. That's why they flipped it to Craig, who had taken my husband's mom's dog, who was the same breed as Twix after she had died, and raised the dog until that dog's death. And so he represented my dog Twix, and Twix was gifting me the statue that was carved out of wood because it represented exactly how he was going to die. And the statue was the eagle because it represented death, which is exactly how I interpreted that. I knew that right away. And it was being gifted to me because Twix was viewing his death actually as a gift. And the statue was painted in muted colors. And the words were said by Craig in the dream. I don't know, I kind of like it. I wanted to try out muted colors this time, because when Marnie reincarnated into this lifetime, she absolutely came back as muted colors in comparison to what Twix had been. And all of this was going to transpire, but I had no idea. And Twix was viewing that as a gift as well, the reincarnation that he already knew was going to take place, and that my higher self absolutely knew was going to take place. And I do believe that this dream came through from my higher self and from Twix. If you want to read more about our story, you can absolutely head to my Instagram and check it out. There's lots of reels there. I'll probably talk about it here on my YouTube eventually. It's quite the story to get through and explain verbally. A lot of it's typed out over on Instagram. But that was a predictive dream that I misinterpreted and then reinterpreted, and it all made perfect sense in the end. So hopefully that helps you be able to better interpret your dreams with your living loved ones and your own higher self and from your own soul. I would also like to add that this applies to information you receive in your meditations, because information you receive in your meditations also comes from your soul and your higher self and from your loved ones. So the exact information that I provided in this video also pertains to information you receive in your meditations. Otherwise, I think that's about it, and see you in the next video. Till next time, much love. Bye.